It's great to be with Matt Domyancic on the Mettle Minds podcast today. He has such a wonderful and diverse background, so I'm really excited to pick his wise brain about his work with veterans and police officers and as a strength coach. Matt is a medically retired police officer that worked in numerous roles as a patrol officer, in peer support, on SWAT, and as a full-time police academy instructor. While he was assuming these roles, he was also a strength coach at Yale University and Georgetown University. He holds a master's degree in sports psychology, where he studied with the noted sports psychologist Ken Ravizza, and he's done strength and mental skills work for NFL combine athletes. He's currently doing work as a chaplain or as a peer support with first responders and veterans. Matt, so good to be here with you today, and thanks for being with me. Pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise, thanks for the opportunity.
Can you talk a little bit more about what happened in terms of your medical retirement from the police? I know you mentioned before you had some disabling injuries. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that more.
So I got hurt during a SWAT workout, and I didn't understand what work comp was. And long story short, the only other times I've dealt with injuries, because I've like never had a cavity, I never get sick, I've always been a health nut. When you get hurt in college football, they do everything like to get you back on the field. Like, so you get all kinds of attention. And even as a strength coach at Yale and Georgetown, if I got hurt, I'd go to the sports med place and be like, help me get better. So I'm used to trusting people that they're going to do the best they can to get you back to your activity. So long story short, a work comp doctor said I needed a surgery, and that surgery went south. I got internal infections. I had corrective surgeries that took forever to get because it's delay, deny, ignore you and workers' comp. It's similar to the VA, cops and firemen. When you get hurt, like it is so hard to get appropriate medical care. It turns out I should have never had the first surgery in the first place. I would have healed on my own. But it was 2 to 3 years of corrective surgeries and being over medicated on opiates, muscle relaxers, benzos, sleep meds, antibiotics, which killed the good flora in my gut and shut down my immune system. So I went from this healthy, fit SWAT guy and somebody that could work out with the Georgetown football team to 270 pounds, 30% body fat, and I had no control of my bodily functions. I had to wear diapers. I was chronically ill and severe chronic pain and on tons of medicines. So I had never been against mental health. And as a cop, I was always trying to convince, and as a coach, try to convince people to seek help. Like, I've been in spiritual direction my whole life. With a lot of people aren't familiar, but it's spending time with, for me, it was like Jesuit priests who are also therapists to do kind of spiritual counseling, so to speak. And so I had no problems when I realized I had reached my limit of coping skills to deal with all of this catastrophe. And so I had a psychiatrist in the DC area that was big into meditation, nutrition, had massage and yoga in her office, super holistic. So I sought her out, and she was like my biggest advocate. And she told me to move here to Los Angeles once I got retired, because I was like, I can't live like this. I don't want to be on drugs. I'm fat. I'm out of shape. I'm miserable. I'm depressed. So she said, move to Los Angeles for functional and integrative medicine, because she said everything I wanted to do was more normal out here. So, and it was the truth. I had to battle work comp. I've had many battles with work comp trying to cut off my pension and medical care and tell me to go back on painkillers and other meds, because I go to physical therapy. I get vitamin IVs. My doctor gives me supplements. Before COVID, I used to do neurofeedback once or twice a week, but we haven't been doing it because of COVID. So it's more expensive for me to go to physical therapy and chiropractors and take supplements and get vitamin IVs and get blood work and check your hormones and do that than give me drugs.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a very long journey and a nutshell of how I'm in Los Angeles and how I got retired.
Yeah. What happened to you, Matt, initially in terms of your injury?
It's kind of, without going down the rabbit hole, it's a very minor lifting. It can happen from lifting. Women have this issue when they have babies, and it has to deal with your bodily functions, and it's something that heals on its own.
Yeah.
But there's a surgery, and it's a surgery people don't talk about because it's kind of sensitive topic. But I've had friends that have had the surgery and they're totally fine. Mine just got messed up. I know it wasn't intentional, but it got messed up. And I've never said this on a podcast, but to be honest, like, I have permanent incontinence issues. I have pelvic floor issues. I have nerve damage in my intestines, and some of my important parts in my intestine were accidentally cut during surgery. So other things my doctors work with, long before intermittent fasting was popular, like, I don't eat all day long. I only eat at night after I'm done doing everything. And sometimes if I'm super busy or traveling, I don't eat for 2 to 3 days at a time to avoid incontinence issues.
Yeah.
And that's where super nutrition and supplementing and just being really rigid and disciplined come in. And I've even gone up to 6 days because I before COVID, I tried to go on at least one 10-day retreat per year, like meditation and the different traditions and things like that.
Yeah.
And like in 2 weeks, I have a peer support conference. So I'm probably going to have to fast for 3 or 4 days to be able to attend all the events. So that's something I've never talked about on a podcast.
Yeah.
It's behind the scenes stuff that I have to deal with. But I want to live life to the fullest despite my disability issues. And I like it that most people just look at me and are like, hey, you're 46 and you're super fit, and I wish I was as healthy as you. I'm like, cool. Yeah. They don't need to know all the stuff I have to do behind the scenes to make it happen.
Right. So it seems like you really take a holistic approach. You mentioned with nutrition and meditation. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the meditation that you do for your own, for yourself, and how that helps you in terms of maintaining your physical and mental well-being.
So over the years, there's a million different ways to meditate, and I don't think there's one right way, but just like nutrition and workouts, people figure out what, if you're paleo or keto or a vegetarian, like, that's the right way. If you're CrossFit, a bodybuilder, a power lifter, like, that's the right way. For meditation, there's 1,000 different styles as well. And I started in high school, believe it or not super disciplined, but I was, in 7th grade, I started eating clean and lifting weights and got hooked. I bought books on the secrets of the ninja mind. I think that was the title of a book in high school. And then, I'm blanking, a sports psychologist that just passed away recently, Terry Orlick, perhaps.
Yeah.
Somehow I got one of his books, either my senior year in high school or freshman year in college. And I was reading these things on how to get better for football. So it was breath work back then. I remember the ninja book had you stare at a candle and do belly breathing. Then in undergrad at Colgate, I had a severe football injury. They said I'd never run again. And it's a longer story, but I had a deep spiritual conversion. I was a cradle Catholic my whole life. Go to church on Sundays and pray, but it was a lot of praying to be good at football, help me through this test, get me through this hangover. I'll never drink this much again. It was very immature and selfish spiritual life, but having football almost removed from me because of an injury. Again, it's a much longer story, but I took a deep dive into what's it really mean to give your life to God. And I started investigating all the Christian denominations, other religious traditions. And I also stumbled into the contemplative Christian tradition, which is a lot of reflective prayer, centering prayer, which can be very similar to Vipassana, Buddhist meditation. And then just through the last 25 years, I go to different retreats and workshops, and I would say centering prayer, that's a Christian form brought back by Father Thomas Keating, which I've done a retreat at his monastery. And also Mary Jo Mettle, I've done two 10-day Vipassana retreats with her. She teaches insight meditation that's derived from Buddhism, techniques for contemplative Christians. But there's also Insight Timer. When I was in undergrad and grad school, I don't know if you remember Dan Millman, but I used to have his cassette tapes.
Right.
Dennis Waitley, I don't think he's a sports psychologist, but he used to have cassette tapes on performance psychology and POWs and what did they do to get through. So I've just always been kind of a geek. I'm a meathead, but I'm a geek, and I tried to and continue to try to learn as much as I can about different ways to hack your mind or your spirit. And so I spent a lot of time in silence. In undergrad, I gave up TV. I didn't own a TV for 13 years. If I wasn't coaching or being a cop, I was meditating, doing contemplative prayer, big on journaling, things like that.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk, Matt, about what's the aim for you of meditation and what are the benefits of it? How does it help you?
Well, in a secular sense, there's all kinds of research that affirms what all these different, whether it's the Sufis or the yogis or the monks or the Buddhists, like meditation and breath work and yoga and Tai Chi, all these contemplative practices have so many. They can help your mood. They can, it's training your parasympathetic nervous system. It can boost your immunity, obviously calm you down, help your recovery. But ultimately, I also view it as a form of prayer. And I'm not saying that, pushing that on anyone, but it's a way for me to, quote, kind of rest in the presence of God, where a lot of prayer when we're younger is talking, asking questions, praising. It's like a one-way conversation. We're always saying memorized prayers or always talking one way. Where a healthy relationship is we both speak, we both listen. And so I view it personally as spending time in prayer, either, quote, listening to God or resting in God's presence. So that's what I view it as. But I also am well aware of all of the science behind all of the many benefits, and including neurofeedback, because the way I did neurofeedback, it was he would take me through different forms of meditation too.
Yeah.
So, and when I'm not meditating, or I haven't done yoga since COVID because I'm in LA, it's all shut down. It's kind of like if somebody's used to working out or eating healthy and you're not doing those things, you just know you're not on your A game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more grounded, I'm more present, I'm less reactive, I can manage more stress, I can be a much better listener, I sleep better, I recover better from my workouts.
Yeah. So, yeah, it sounds like it gives you more peace of mind as you're functioning in your day-to-day interactions or going about your day-to-day tasks. And yeah, that's great. Can you talk a little bit more, Matt, about the work that you do with first responders and with veterans?
Yeah, so I either have the chaplain role or the peer support role, but admittedly, I may not do it in the most traditional sense. I embed myself in the trenches. I ride along at least twice a week, and I do full shifts on evening and graveyard shifts. I go to the stations. I just hang out with them. If they invite me to training, I go shooting. I've gone through EVOC training as a chaplain, pursuit driving, pit driving, ramming cars. I'll go to defensive tactics, SWAT training, either observe, participate in what they let me participate. I've been on roofs with firemen, and I'm blanking on their uniform. Oh, that's terrible. But they're punching holes in the roof and learning more about the firefighters' jobs, because I have no clue. I've worked with firefighters my whole life, but I've never, been immersed in their culture and their training of their other things other than showing up when somebody's hurt and doing medical runs. So
yeah,
I do those things, and primarily a lot of them because of my background, because they're not going to trust you right away, even if you are a former first responder like me. Anything, a chaplain is seen as spiritual or mental health. There's stigmas behind, quote, religion and psychology, any of that. And also if they may not, they're just such tight groups. You have to show them that you prove that you care first. So I build relationships. They interrogate me often, and they find out about the football, the strength coaching, the sports psych, the SWAT. And so a lot of times they do want to ask questions about working out, nutrition, supplements, meditation, shooting, fighting, tactical SWAT stuff. And so I devote a lot of time to I help them in any ways I can with those types of things. And then if they open the door, I talk about stress management, self-regulation, the importance of sleep. I talk about how nutrition does tie into your immunity, your mood. And then through those relationships, often, I don't know if it's 6 months, a year, 2 years later, if that person either gets in a shooting, has a divorce, is going through a knee surgery, then they feel comfortable reaching out and asking either for help with finding other resources, if it's a therapist. Sometimes people need help with substance abuse. And I used to be a chaplain for a PTSD and substance abuse facility as well, only for first responders. Or sometimes they just need somebody to listen because, well, men or people in general, but especially men, hold things in. We're not in touch as much with our interior lives. There's a macho stigma to getting in touch with your thought life or your feelings, your heart. So a lot of times it's just them feeling comfortable enough with me to kind of unload and share their story and be heard. So be attentive, for me to be attentive, listen, and for them to feel understood, to feel heard, and to not feel judged. And that's kind of a lot of the feedback I've gotten in the last couple of years through first responders and veterans is like, I feel like you understand me, in part because you spend time doing this stuff with us. We know you have some military experience, some police experience, and we know you care. We trust you care, and I don't feel judged. I feel like you really pay attention. And sometimes that's all they need is to unload sometimes.
Yeah. So, I imagine being a first responder or a veteran can obviously entail a lot of stressful moments and difficulties. And maybe for the greater public, they may be familiar with some of those things, but maybe not, all of the kind of aspects that may be typical, or if there are such things as typical challenges or concerns for first responders or veterans. So maybe you can speak more to that. Like what are the kinds of stresses and worries that first responders or veterans maybe have?
Well, these days, at least for police officers and to some degree firefighters, it's a completely different world because of, for police, it started back with the Michael Brown incident, which a lot of people still don't even know the facts behind that because the media portrays things often not in a very truthful way. And there's a quote, war on cops culturally, like they're racist, they're murderers, they're this, they're that. And then the last 2 years, it's ramped up to unbelievable levels where police have to deal with even their faith communities, their friends, their families, social media, teachers telling their children in school, professors telling their kids in college, cops are bad, cops are racist, cops are murderers, politicians speaking out against police all the time on issues that 99% of the time they end up wrong. But when the investigations are done, the media doesn't cover the story that they were wrong about in the first place. So now they deal with a lot of what I would consider moral injury, much like our Vietnam veterans. You're risking your life, you're taking sacrifices for people that hate you, and you feel, betrayed and unsupported by these people that you're risking your life. And in a lot of places now for the police, the district attorneys are not prosecuting criminals, and they're spending all kinds of time wanting to prosecute police, remove their qualified immunity, which people don't understand. That means if I do something in the performance of my job and there's an accident or a mistake, you can sue and take my house and my cars and my bank account. But people should look up the number of people that are killed accidentally or maimed, like myself, by doctors every year. It's an astronomical numbers, and they vary depending on what journal you read. But we're not making doctors wear body cameras and mics, and we're not letting people in the surgical room film and yell at them with their smartphones while they're trying to do surgery. And then if a surgery goes wrong, we're not putting them on the news and social media and putting in their address and saying, go harass and threaten this doctor's life for making a mistake, and then create some kind of medical review board that's not even doctors. So people judging the doctor on the film and the microphone and all that stuff aren't even medically trained or educated.
Yeah.
And that's at least what police officers are dealing with. On top of all of that, all first responders and veterans deal with immersion and trauma and the suffering of other people. Like, that's your career. And while you're on scene or in combat, you can't be in touch with your emotions because you're controlling other people's emotions in the scene and you have a job to do. But all of those professions are not training their people before you go to combat or before you hit the streets as a cop or a firefighter. What do you do with all the death, the violence? Even emotionally, there's things like seeing abused, neglected children, domestic violence over and over, maimed people during car accidents. It's not even just, it's a number of things. You just are immersed in the suffering and the misery of humanity, and you have no training mentally, emotionally, or spiritually how to process and digest this stuff. And for veterans and first responders, if you're even lucky enough to have mental health resources or any wellness, because it's much more holistic to me, mind, body, spirit, everything's tied in together. It's not just having mental health professionals, clinical psychologists, reactively jump in after you have PTSD and addiction and you're going through your third divorce. And so even if you do have resources, most of our resources are reactive. But if we know these are things that are going to happen to cops, firefighters, and veterans, why are we not preparing them ahead of time rather than wait until people are broken and then try to send them to treatment, send them on a retreat? There's some really good retreats that do meditation, yoga, journaling, healthy eating, but you have to be suicidal and addicted to apply.
Yeah.
Why don't we do some of these retreats and workshops up front, and then take in sleep, adrenaline, and cortisol? A lot of people don't understand or know that cops have a 10 to 22 year shorter lifespan than any other profession. Higher rates of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, obesity. It's not all diet, it's adrenaline and cortisol and lack of sleep. And because departments are understaffed and underfunded, and they have been for the last like 10 years, it's been getting worse and worse. And even now with all the defund the police, you're having people that have to work 10, 14, 16-hour shifts. And they might have an hour commute home, back, be held over. You're sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night. You know, if you ever watch, like you listen to Dr. Matthew Walker or Dr. Andrew Huberman, they talk about if you've been up for 16 or more hours, you're at least at a 0.05 blood alcohol content level as far as decision making and reaction time. Yeah. And there's cops and even firefighters who are going 10 days in a row with 3 or 4 hours sleep a night, which also creates health problems and mood. It's going to affect your mood as well.
Yeah, sure. And when you're trying, of course, to deal with people, and as you describe, difficult circumstances, you know, just having your baseline sleep be so low that's probably not going to optimize the quality of those interactions. So, Matt, just putting the question back to you that you posed about why not invest in more preventative kinds of measures to address the known or virtually certain kinds of challenges that first responders and veterans are likely to face. What's your sense of why there aren't more resources or a focus on addressing some of the psychological challenges which you so vividly describe?
So there's a limited amount of time with police and firemen to train them in their academies. There's a limited budget. And sadly, most people don't understand that after your academy as a police officer, you hardly get any training. Every agency is different, some more than others. But if you look at what are the hours to acquire motor skill development, they don't even get enough hours to acquire the defensive tactics, the martial arts, and the shooting to a proficient level, let alone to automatically perform those skills under stress and make decisions while they're in the academy. So what a lot of academies are checking the box for liability, and training is often PowerPoints. So the agency can say, hey, if you screw up down the line, it's on you. We quote trained you, PowerPoint on day 14, PowerPoint number 60, slide 3, that's you. We trained you. But you don't train people for sports or in a classroom. So there's not even enough time or money to say, hey, let's do another 2 months of a police or fire academy. And after you check the box to be certified in your state, city, or county, whatever the legal requirements are, we're going to do just 2 to 3 months at the end, kind of like we're a special forces unit getting ready to deploy overseas. We're going to lift weights and do strength conditioning every day. We're going to do the martial arts defensive tactics every day. And we're going to do tactical shooting, which is not, people don't understand. A lot of cops just learn how to shoot on paper with no stress during broad daylight. Can you function the gun with zero stress and barely hit a paper target? But hey, 5 years from now, you're going to be shooting in the dark with somebody shooting back while you're running for cover and they're running to get away. You know how hard it is to shoot somebody in those circumstances, and they've never had shooting in dark, shooting and moving, shooting popping out of a vehicle. Do more of that training and scenario training where you have to make decisions under stress. And then in between, do the gratitude journal, do breath work, do yoga, do meditation. When I was at the academy, I incorporated defensive tactics, tactical shooting, scenario training, and I brought in Polar Heart Rate Company and did research, even though now heart rate variability is the new thing and more accurate. At the time, we had heart rate monitors to help people understand how their body was physiologically reacting to stress or their poor conditioning, or perhaps they were not confident in certain motor skills, so their body was reacting. And then I had things, little boxes called stress erasers, a company stress eraser. You put your finger in and you do breath work. And it was an early heart rate variability thing that now people can do a lot on their phones. So incorporated into the tactical training per se and fitness training, I did breath work. I did imagery. I'd have them lay down, say after a workout, and I would turn out the lights and I would walk them through like I was the dispatcher or the radio person. After I put them through progressive muscle relaxation, just simple flex your right hand, relax left hand, get them calmed down, get them breathing, and then walk them through imagery of a radio call or a dispatch call. They're getting sent somewhere to deal with something. So I think it can be done, but you just need more time and more funding. And then it's going to be the higher up people have to be aware of this.
Yeah.
You know, and right now, even in sports, not every school athlete or coach is even aware of performance or sports psychology. Unfortunately, you bring that up to people and be like, I'm not broken, I'm not crazy, I don't need fixed. You know, that it's not all clinical. So you would need leadership that understands the importance of even more tactical and motor skills training, but more mental, emotional, self-regulation type training.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of leadership in agencies now, not all, they are people that have had admin jobs most of their career, and they're chosen for political reasons. Not, you should be looking at somebody's patrol record. Were they working the evening and midnight shift and trying to arrest a lot of people? And then do they have investigation or tactical experience on specialty units? Are they people that had to train hard themselves, or did they do minimal years on patrol in a safe district on day shift, try to promote to sergeant, and then take admin jobs in the property room or whatever else? They've been behind a desk for 15 years and now they're command staff or chief. Shooting, lifting, martial arts, meditation, journaling is not going to be on their radar, even though I think you could collectively get, even from the sports and clinical psych community, people that could write justification scientifically why people should be doing gratitude journals, meditation, breath work, yoga, things like that. And there are studies with veterans how that helps PTSD. And I mean, there's the research out there that says that stuff is important and useful, but you would need people that understood it and were passionate about pushing it through, but it's just not a priority.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, you've spoken quite clearly and nicely about some of the factors, I guess, that mitigate the provision of some of these kinds of the training, the physical training, but also the barriers to maybe integrating some of the psychological training that seems to be very important given the multitude of stressors that these individuals regularly endure. Yeah, so I appreciate your points and perspective on that. In terms of, you alluded to this idea, Matt, that a lot of the training occurs kind of by PowerPoint slide, and obviously when you're doing motor skill performance, it's very much a physical thing, and one needs to be able to repeat those skills countless times so they become automatic. And I wonder if implicit in your comment was this idea that in high threat situations, that motor skill performance starts to break down. Maybe you can kind of speak to that point, because I think you were kind of touching on that, but I wanted to explore that a bit more.
Yeah, well, motor skill does break down under stress, but what if you don't even have the motor skills developed enough to perform them under stress in the first place? So let's say the defensive tactics, which is the martial arts portion of a police academy. Most police academies might have 60, 70, 80, or even, let's be generous and say 100 hours of the martial arts training. But that defensive tactics includes the taser, the baton, the OC spray, 5, 10, 15, 20 different handcuffing techniques. And then whatever the quote martial arts moves are for that state or jurisdiction, there could be a menu of these 200 moves that you have to say you're trained on. And what if you only have 80 or 100 hours? And I'm going to teach you martial arts, handcuffing, baton strikes, OC spray, and taser. You don't even, like I said, with the firearms, do people understand that a lot of police are not like competitive type shooters? Like this weekend, I shot a couple of people in the community that I didn't even know were in the gun, said, hey, Matt, come shooting with us. And there was a competition going on where there was old ladies that would crush me, running around shooting lever action guns like it sounded like a machine gun, because they practice. A police officer doesn't get those repetitions. It's just, can you barely function your gun? And then once, twice, or 3 times a year, you might shoot 20 or 50 rounds on paper just to say you can function your gun. It'd be like, we're going to have you throw a football. Just throw a football. You don't have to throw it in practice in a scrimmage or in a game. Just a couple times a year, we're going to bring you out and make sure you can just throw a football. It doesn't even have to be that accurate. I mean, a lot of people don't understand that's the equivalent for a lot of departments' firearms training. Mm-hmm. And if somebody's a martial artist, ask them how long it took for them to get a brown belt or a black belt, or whatever level would you have to be proficient in Muay Thai, Krav Maga, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Sambo, MMA. How many classes did you take where you feel proficient to use that in self-defense?
Yeah, a lot.
And it's good. A lot.
Yeah.
And when you're doing self-defense, you do not have to make all the decisions nor have all the responsibility and liability that a police officer does. So yeah, motor skills break down under pressure, but what if you've never even developed those motor skills to be automatic in the first place? And then also you have to factor in decision-making. And there's an author, Dustin Solomon, who has, it's buildingshooters.com is his website. And I'm working through some of his books that go through the neuroscience of teaching firearms, but also we're spending all this time on barely what little time we have on motor skill development, but not incorporating enough decision-making. And what gets cops in trouble is the decision-making, shoot, no shoot, under extreme pressure. But what if you haven't spent much time doing that? And I equate that to scrimmaging before you play in a game. You know, a lot of cops never put on all the football pads and scrimmage. And then 2, 5, 10 years after the academy, they're in the Super Bowl, full pads, with a professional athlete that's been training and is going to take their head off. And they only played flag football in the academy 10 years ago. I don't know if those analogies make sense or how to try to get this across.
Yeah. No, I certainly. I mean, I think the point I'm taking away is just the training is clearly insufficient, and
that's my opinion. But a department couldn't admit that, right? Then you'd be liable for saying we're not training them enough.
Right. That, you, as you mentioned, kind of in high threat situations, you mentioned decision making on a number of occasions. That if decision making is breaking down, And that's even probably, in the world of sport, decision making can break down even when those skills are automated. But you're suggesting they're not even getting to that point in many cases, or in most departments. So how then could one be expected to perform in a Super Bowl level, to use your analogy, when you haven't had kind of rec league training to begin with? In terms of decision making, and you mentioned imagery, and what would help, what would help first responders or military performers in terms of decision making? What do you think would be effective, or what are some of the things, I guess, that you do in your work to help elevate the decision making capabilities?
I think it's a holistic approach, and to the people that do things proficient. So let's say in law enforcement, we'll look at full-time SWAT teams. In the military, let's look at special operations units, whether it's SEALs, Green Berets, Delta, PJs, Rangers. What do? They get massive amounts of fitness training, whatever their tactical tool belt is, the shooting, the defensive tactics, and then they get a bunch of scrimmaging. Like, they're constantly practicing. Let's look at how we train athletes, and then can we train first responders that way? Maybe that's the best way of just saying, like, because, I say this all the time. If you have a high school kid in a sport, they're getting more training per week. Say if it's traditionally, I'm like a 2 to 3 hour practice a night. That's how it was for me. They're getting more training in a week than a cop gets in a full year of an opportunity to do fitness, at least on duty through the department, fitness, the martial arts, and the shooting. Yeah. So, and then I also believe that the more you are managing stress and the more you can self-regulate, I think we know this leads to better decision making and being calm under pressure. Yeah. For instance, that little stress eraser thing, the company only gave me so many models, so I would only give it to cops that I know would do it, because all of this is work, right? You want to be good at any skill, sports-wise or mental skill, it takes work. And there's a bomb squad guy who religiously did the stress eraser breath work. And then one day he came into my office and said, wow, I got called out last night, and I didn't realize to the end of the call that the whole way driving code, which is lights and siren, which is very distracting and stressful, and you're flying. He got there and handled whatever the call was. He goes, afterwards, I would think in his own words, he almost described like a flow state. I didn't realize how quickly and smoothly everything went that time, and that I was doing the breath work that I had been training every night, and how much better he performed. So in all of these occupations, often you look at the SWAT teams that get they bring in high-speed trainers, they get to lift every day, shoot all the time, they scrimmage all the time and shoot houses, and they're operational all the time. Special operations groups obviously get a lot of reps overseas, and when they're back home, they're working out all the time. Federal units like DEA FAST and FBI HRT, super high standards to get in, super high standards to remain in those units. And as I understand it, good budgets to be constantly in training. But what I used to try to argue and say now is, when you have a school shooting, a church shooting, a mosque shooting, it's not the SWAT team showing up, it's the patrol person. So we need to invest in more training for patrol. And I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned kind of this lack of resources and insufficient training. You also mentioned devices. Do you see, I know there's a whole host of different platforms, apps, and different things. Do you see some role for, apps or maybe devices? And I'm not asking you to give a plug for anyone in particular, but just, like, given the dearth or absence of resources and time, and where you mentioned this example of this officer who's describing a flow state while the sirens are going off because they've had the chance to practice breathing. Do you believe that there would be benefit to having some kind of, maybe technological devices or things incorporated so that maybe the individual does that remotely or in their own time or own way?
So I'm a caveman. I'm terrible with technology. I can't do apps. I get stressed out over phone and computer stuff.
Right,
But
right.
most people, and especially the younger generations, love that stuff. So whether it's heart math or these different heart rate variability, breath work apps, I think it would be phenomenal. And I'm forgetting all the names of the things that get advertised to athletes, like Apollo is some little vibrational thing that supposedly helps you self-regulate. Muse. I'm sure there's a number of products out there that if somebody that was competent could teach it and give it to police officers, firefighters, and veterans as part of their onboarding, that some of them, not all of them, just like you could give somebody the experiential opportunity to get in shape and to eat healthy food all the time. Not everybody's going to stick with it, but I don't care if 10% of the workforce sticks with some kind of breath work or meditation through an app. It's going to improve and slowly spread. So I do believe in that stuff. I'm just terrible at technology. I wish I knew more.
Yeah.
And when people ask me, because cops and firemen will ask me for apps, I reach out to other people. And sometimes I look at people from the sports psych listserv have sent out the apps that they recommend to their college students and athletes. And so I say, I don't have a clue how to do it, but here it is. And at Velocity, we did have Muse. When I did neurofeedback, they also had me hooked up to heart math, and that's really nice. But I'll be honest, and I don't know if anybody from heart math watches it. One of the difficulties is I tried to go through one of their online courses because I was going to try to learn and maybe attempt to put some cops and firemen on it, even though this may never happen because I'm bad with computers. The people teaching it were not culturally competent, and some of them are just frankly boring. So if we have apps that we can introduce, if it's sports psych or clinical psych professionals to introduce to first responders, they're going to have to introduce it in a way that they appear culturally competent and are speaking the language of the cops or the firefighters, and can relate to them how it's going to be beneficial. Like do a good job of sales pitching, how it's going to be beneficial.
Right, right. Yeah, well, I guess that goes back earlier to your point, Matt, about the trust, right? Like if you have someone who's perceived as an outsider and it's like, oh, well, they may have all their fancy degrees in the world, but if they don't know me, my culture, the ins and outs of what it means or entails to be a first responder or to be in combat or high threat situations, then maybe they're sort of kind of shut down right from the beginning. So kind of finding those right, so to speak, individual sounds like it's important in introducing these possibilities. You talked about I just want to maybe shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the value of social support for these individuals. Earlier you were discussing how when you work with first responders and veterans, that it's important for them to feel like you hear them, you understand them, you know where they're coming from. Talk a little bit more about the importance of social support for these individuals.
Well, I mean, a lot of people listening to this podcast are probably familiar, like what's the number one factor for longevity? It's community. So, and if you read books like Tribe by Sebastian Junger, or Dr. Ed Tick writes some very good books for veterans, where he goes through how tribal cultures took care of their warriors and respected them. Like when people went out to battle and came back to the community, they put them in the center of the circle and they listened to their stories, in essence, to say, we know you have wisdom from all the hardship and adversity you faced. We also know you did this for us. So we want to hear your story so we can share in the burden of the suffering you had to witness and endure. And right now in our communities, I don't think we look to our veterans or to our police officers and say, these are people that have wisdom because of the real shit they've seen and done. And these are people that we want to support and encourage. We have really dehumanized, I think, police for sure, but to some degree, veterans as well. People are seen by their uniform, and people affiliate it with a political ideology and their feelings. I think, I mean, it's just because I've met people in yoga. I've been immersed. I'm a meathead. Let me lift weights. Let me shoot guns. Let me eat steaks with the meat eater alpha males. But I also have been immersed in the Buddhist meditation community, the yoga community, the contemplative Christian community. But I've had so many people, and I don't tell people my background right away. I obviously don't look the part, but eventually people ask questions and I'll share, because I want people to get to know me before I tell them my background, so the walls and the judgment don't go up. Yeah. But often people will say, wow, Matt, it's so nice to meet someone who was a cop that was actually nice and cares about others, or a veteran that doesn't have PTSD and like is going to go postal. Like there's all these horrible stereotypes that people make. And think about the yoga, the Buddhist meditation, the contemplative Christian community. These are the communities that are doing spiritual practice to move towards more non-dual thinking. The world is not black and white. It's not this or that. And we don't focus on how we differentiate. We focus on what we all have in common in humanity. Yeah. Yet even the spiritual traditions and communities, and even a couple of my theology professors railed against police and military constantly based on their political ideology.
Yeah. Do you think there would be value in having some of these individuals, or creating forums or opportunities where they could share their experiences, suffering or positive experiences with, I don't know, members of the community? I don't know who that might be specifically, but you know, you mentioned this idea of being able to share their humanity, and maybe in so doing that might reduce some of the stereotypes.
First, you would have to gain their trust, and at least with cops right now, that would be very hard, because like I said, the school teachers, professors, politicians, media, friends, family, and spiritual communities are constantly, the news story comes out, no investigation is done. They show you a 5-second clip of a 3-minute interaction, and everybody believes the cop was a murderer and a racist. And then 2-3 months later, when the facts come out, no, the media doesn't put it out because it doesn't fit the narrative. So police, more than ever, it would be really hard to make that happen. So I would encourage civilians to do police citizens academies and get exposure and training to a little bit of training, and do ride-alongs and form organizations. And some communities do have organizations that bring meals to the cops on holidays, spend time with them, bring them gifts. Right here in South LA, I got a call from a cop yesterday that we want to have meals for the needy and around Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we do want to join with people from the more wealthier communities here that say they care about these communities. Well, here's your chance. Let's come and put on some meals together so you can serve these people rather than arguing your politics online on Facebook and Nextdoor and Instagram. Right. And also you can serve these meals with cops and firemen that work those dangerous districts and get to know them in person. Yeah. There have been the retreats that Ed Tick used to put on, and Dr. John Becknell, they did have people from the community come in, but often these were Vietnam veterans, so much older and removed. It wasn't like they just got back and, you know, they got spit on by people and told they were baby killers. So they're 30, 40 years removed from the war. Yeah. But they had a ritual, and the ritual had the veterans would have pieces of tape and tell the civilians, like, I have this injury, you know, like, because the citizens are going to share in the injuries that these men and women have from war. And then also you know, can put a sticker on your heart or your head. You know, I have a mental, you know, PTSD. I have emotional injuries from the things I experienced. Yeah. And so there's different things with rituals that people have done during retreats with veterans, with the community. But right now with law enforcement in the community, that'd be a big stretch. But even firemen, because I've been on retreats with cops and firemen, and it's building the trust to open up is just so difficult. And again, part of this is because it's stigmatized. If I'm a cop or a fireman and a veteran, and I admit that I have anxiety or depression or nightmares or flashbacks or negative unwanted thoughts in any manner, are the other cops, firemen, and veterans going to think I'm weak I'm broken, I'm crazy, I'm a PUSSY, I can't be counted on to do my job. If somebody at work finds out, are they going to take my badge and gun? Are they going to fire me? Am I not going to get promoted? Can I not be on the gang unit because I can't be trusted? So a lot of this community support comes down to trust, and opening up and being vulnerable is so stigmatized.
And is that the case, Matt, within the, say, policing communities or within the military, where members of their own are reluctant or hesitant to be forthcoming about their own stresses and challenges?
Well, yeah, because what if you're my teammate in any manner and I tell you a bunch of things? I'm worried that you're going to think that I'm not good enough to go to work tomorrow with, right? Instead of being honest, when you see dead bodies, especially children, that should break everybody's heart. There's just one example of, if you're a human being, seeing a child suffer or murdered or killed in an accident, it should break your heart. Or maybe you're the 2% sociopath, I don't know. But even that is the suck it up mentality. So like today, when we're done, I'm going up with a great organization called Covered 6 that trains veterans for executive protection and armed security. And also a lot of them are transitioning into law enforcement. With Covered 6, you can use your GI Bill to go through these 2-3 month training to be executive protection, armed security. I'll go on the range days and I'll shoot with these young veterans. And because I can still shoot fairly well and fast, and because I look fit for, quote, an old guy to these people, by the end of the day, there's usually some respect, or by the end of 2 days. And I just talk for 5 to 10 minutes. Hey guys, I'm all about the fitness, the fighting, the shooting, if you're going to be in an armed profession. But you guys know from your combat experiences, you have friends that have probably self-medicated with alcohol, screwing people they shouldn't screw, driving their motorcycle really fast, ending up divorced, addicted, or with PTSD issues. If we care about our brothers and sisters, why are we all being silent on these issues? It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're broken. And if any of you need help finding resources and you don't want to go to the VA, contact me. Like, take my card and let's talk and let me try to help you find resources. And inevitably, if there's a group of 10 or 12 veterans, 5 of them will take my card and 2 or 3 of them will stay in touch with me or reach out at least a few times. So a lot of times I think it's just somebody just opening up about it and being vulnerable themselves that might have a little respect with them. Right. And then it gives permission. Can we give each other permission to be a little more human? I mean, it's really being human, I think.
Yeah.
And we suppress that.
Would you say, Matt, in the context you're describing, where many service members or first responders may be very reluctant to disclose any form of quote unquote weakness, and in a context where there's these chronic stressors or intense suffering that you describe, in that environment, is it possible for individuals to thrive psychologically?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the most beautiful human beings when it comes to compassion and caring for others, but also performance at a high level, doing things under stress, are cops, firemen, and people in the military. And I think sometimes we do focus too much, even though I said we're so reactive. I mean, when it comes down to statistics, I don't think it's like the majority of first responders and veterans are going to have PTSD and be suicidal. Most of those people, whether it's like unconscious through their childhood and their faith community or their sports upbringing, somewhere they've gotten tools to use those things as what I call your emotional, your psychological, your spiritual weightlifting. The adversity, the setbacks, and the sufferings in our lives, if we lean into the pain and the emotions and acknowledge our thoughts, are the things that give us wisdom, are the things that help us grow. And, you know, in the spiritual traditions, the contemplative spiritual traditions, that's the same too. It's not that you're sinning, so you're being punished. Like, that's such a, not a good Christian perspective, that if things aren't going well and I'm suffering, I didn't pray enough, tithe enough, or have enough faith, or I haven't been going to church. No, It's not that God's punishing you. Free will, whatever your theology is, bad shit happens in the world. but you can grow closer to God through this and become more of your true self. And your true self and God are two sides of the same coin if we're talking like spiritually. So the more adversity often breaks down our ego, right? We are not in control. And it's so hard, especially for those professions, to admit, I can't control this. Things are out of control. So it gives a chance for the ego to take a little bit of a backseat and some wisdom and growth. And if you believe in a higher power, for the higher power to maybe influence your life a little more.
Right. So I'm interested in your verbiage there, Matt, where you say the adversity can facilitate growth if, I think, as you put it, we lean into it. And maybe you can describe more what you mean by that. What do you mean by leaning into the adversity and how doing so can be helpful?
Well, first we have to, this is my generic meathead explanation. Can we become more aware of our thoughts, what's going on in our head, and more aware of what's going on in our hearts, our emotions, our feelings? And then if we become more aware of it, can we see what we do when unwanted thoughts or negative or painful emotions come up? Are we using tobacco, alcohol, sex, gambling, driving fast, buying toys, working tons of overtime, which is what a lot of first responders do, to avoid, distract, and numb themselves from dealing with their unwanted thoughts and feelings? So leaning into it first, I think, takes an awareness. Oh my God. And then recognizing what our patterns are. I'm eating a bunch, dude, I'm so bad when I get stressed. I'm like such a strict eater. But if you see me eating ice cream and potato chips and you're close to me, it's like, what's going on, Matt? Like, what's bothering you? I'm self-medicating with that stuff. So recognizing our own patterns and the journaling, the meditation, the therapy, different types of retreats, small group sharing. I think these things help us become more aware of our thoughts, our feelings, and our patterns.
Yeah. And the term mindfulness, I guess, is used frequently these days, I think, to encapsulate some of the concepts and ideas that you're talking about, right? Being aware of our thoughts, kind of gaining a little bit of distance to realize that, maybe we can respond differently to those thoughts, unwanted thoughts or emotions that come into our minds, or that there's a choice that we have about how we want to respond. And certainly, increasing evidence, as you mentioned earlier, I guess, of the benefits of being mindful, of sort of having that opportunity to be more present, I guess, in our day-to-day actions and responses to things. Do you, I guess maybe this seems obvious given what you just said, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you witness in the work that you do people who have experienced extreme duress or challenge and are able to apply some of the strategies, or maybe they just interact with yourself or engage in some of these exercises and experience some kind of development as a consequence? Do you see that? Do you witness that?
I witness it. And and this is what my plea for is to everybody out there, the politicians, to fund more of this type of training, because people just don't have the tools. They don't know any better. And then we wait till they're really bad, but there's retreats like Boulder Crest, Save a Warrior, Warriors Ascent, the Sparta Project. There's Warriors Heart in Texas, which is another one of these first responder veteran rehab places. People go to those things and end up, some of them say, okay, I'm going to meditate and eat healthier and journal and engage my faith life and be open to going to therapy. And it saves and changes their life. But I want to introduce these things up front, knowing what's going to happen, and in very small ways. I can't take credit for any of it, but if you expose first responders on a day-to-day basis, as you develop these relationships, there are guys that stop drinking their energy drinks as much and now do organic coffee with MCT oil first thing in the morning. And then they want to clean up their diet. And then maybe they'll talk about combat breathing or breath work. Or when I worked with the NFL guys, I did deep breathing and stretching, which is essentially yoga, but I didn't tell them use any labels. And I didn't tell them that I had a background in sports psychology. I just incorporated experiential learning exposing people to experiential learning where they feel the results to some things. And there's going to be a percentage, even if it's only 10 or 15% of people that say, I'm going to start a healthier eating plan. You know what? I'm going to admit to you that I actually do go to therapy with my wife, or I see my pastor, but I don't tell anybody else. Well, anything with me is confidential because I'm a chaplain. So people do end up admitting things or being more open to things. And then if they open up to each other, say if a partner opens up to each other about something, they'll be like, yeah, we're going to go to a jujitsu class, but I'll go to yoga with you. We'll try yoga. It doesn't mean we're wimps. So I think a lot of it is all of us as humans giving each other permission that these self-care, self-regulation, self-help, or whatever you call all these different things we're talking about should be, I think it should be normal and not stigmatized. Because there's even civilians, even people in my family, when there's conflict, I talk about finding a good therapist or psychologist. I mean, like major resistance to it.
If you were to share some advice, I guess, in terms of maybe directed towards either first responders themselves or veterans who are, going through training or maybe at different phases of their career. So they could be either going through training or maybe they have had some difficult experience. I guess, what piece of advice would you offer these individuals?
I'll say this popped in my mind, so I'm just going to throw this out there. What visually popped in my head is I spent a year going to the PTSD and substance abuse rehab center every Saturday, 2-hour drive, and usually 1 to 2 hours one-on-one with each resident. So, and then a 2-hour drive back in the middle of the night. I heard hundreds of stories from cops and firefighters, and there's a common theme from people that end up with substance abuse or addiction issues and or PTSD and suicidal ideation. And those stories always include some sort of, I never wanted to tell anybody because I thought I was the only one on my shift or my unit that was experiencing this. So I stuffed it. But then I collect, they collect more things. I think we all have a misery cup. After hearing all these stories, every human has some kind of cup that can only hold so much misery. And if you don't find a way to dump some of that misery and poison out and process and filter it, at some point it overflows. And then people talk about their childhood trauma they forgot about, their parents being divorced, their military trauma, and then their first responder trauma and other broken relationships. We're human beings. None of us are alone. And if you're a cop or a firefighter or a veteran that's experiencing any type of depression or lack of meaning in your life and some kind of emotional pain or obtrusive thoughts, you are not alone. You are having a common reaction to uncommon circumstances that regular people are not exposed to. There are studies with just police alone that say an average police career will experience 188 up to 800 critical incidents. And a normal civilian might see 2 or 3 of those throughout the course of their life. So you are drinking trauma and crisis and suffering from the fire hose. And having a broken heart or unwanted thoughts or depression or lack of meaning and purpose from not being able to process that misery cup that might be filling up or about to overflow, that's a normal reaction.
It seems, perfectly logical that in any individual who experiences, as you said, in excess of 800 traumatic moments or those kind of critical incidents, I think you said, would be impacted in some way, shape, or form. And so just to ensure that individuals going through that feel that there's others, that certainly their peers may also be experiencing similar things, seems to be really important, and to have a willingness to share, to find ways to cope, so that, as you say, I really love that analogy, Matt, about the cup and not having it spill over, right? That you need to find ways to work through, to manage, to thrive, I guess, as we've been talking a little bit about, so that those things don't spill over and impact yourself or others in a negative way. So I think those are excellent words of wisdom, but also I certainly I appreciate, as we've been discussing, the genuineness of your comments, and I can imagine that you have trust in the people that you work with, and so I just want to say thanks for taking the time to chat, and I really appreciate your thoughtful comments and sharing your experiences. Great to be with you.
I appreciate this opportunity, and yeah, great discussion. And I haven't got to enjoy the sports psych community crossing over to what I'm doing now. And I would love to have more of that, because I kind of feel like I'm a bit on an island out here doing chaplain, peer support, and wellness, which relates so much to sport and performance psychology and the goals of also clinical psychologists, which is not my field. But I think we're all on the same team, whether you're working on mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health. And our first responders and veterans deserve these resources. They deserve our care, our attention, and our love.
Yeah, most definitely. And, as you alluded to, Matt, I think while there certainly are contextual differences, no doubt, between, say, athletes as an example and first responders or service members, there's also probably some commonalities in terms of the mindset of, being tough, working through pain and difficulty, injury, adversity, not necessarily wanting to share those things that are perceived as weak in some way. So I imagine there's a lot of similarity, and as you've said, certainly scope for combining the expertise of people like sports psychology professionals with people certainly within the police or first responders and service members. So again, wonderful to speak with you, and thanks so much for your wonderful insight. I appreciate our chat.
You're so welcome.